Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Travel Vault webinar, where we're continuing to help you manage your business through the current COVID-19 crisis. My name is Christina Brazier and I'm the Operations Director at Travel Vault. And today I'm pleased to be joined by our regular panellists, Matt Purser and Adam Pennyfather from Travel Trade Consultancy, and Farina Azam from Kemp Little. We're also joined by Farina's colleagues Rebecca Butler and Kathryn Dooks today, who will be taking us through the latest changes in the furlough scheme, which hopefully a lot of you will find useful. As usual, all attendees will be muted during the webinar to ensure a better sound quality, but we do encourage questions, so please, if you would like to send a question, please use the Q&A function on the Zoom app, or if you're dialing in, feel free to email me your question directly. The webinar is being recorded and will be made available on YouTube later today. So without further ado, we'll turn to Matt as usual to start us off. Matt, what have been the latest developments in the last couple of weeks, please?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Good morning, everyone. I think we're all sort of waiting on tenterhooks at the moment, really, to see what the outcome really of the quarantine rules are going to be that are due to come in. I know Farina's going to probably touch upon those as well. Whether the travel industry is successful in trying to push back on those. But I think sitting alongside that, we've still got the FCO rules as well, and this idea of air bridges as well. So we're all sort of waiting to see how that can pan out. I think the other thing that's happened this week really is that there's been sort of some ramping up again from ABTA to government to try and get the package travel regulations changed around the refund credit notes, and rather than the refund of cash. And I think they're pointing now to the shearing's failure and think that that's the first of many potentially. So I think I just really wanted to highlight a post that we'd done on Travel Trade Consultancy that's on our website, done by Adam really, which was talking about your future cash flow as well. So, you know, I think some companies have been successful in getting CBILS loans or bounce back loans, but obviously that might get them through the short term. But in 12 months, when they've actually got to start repaying back on those loans, I think it's really important that they're looking at cash flow beyond that as well. So I just wanted to highlight that really, but that's where we are at the moment. So not too much of an update, but yeah, we're just waiting for sort of the next stages really.
Thanks, Matt. That's helpful. I mean, we've been seeing and speaking to a lot of our members, and obviously bookings are minimal at the moment. And I saw on the news last night that lastminute.com are saying that they're getting lots of activity on their website in terms of people looking for holidays but not booking. Is that what you've seen with your clients as well?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's this anticipation that you know, if the air bridges come in and the quarantine is relaxed, then that's really good news for the industry. But I think what no one knows really is what the appetite of customers is likely to be. So I think everyone is well and truly fed up of being locked down and is eager to go onto a holiday. But I think there's that. They're just being a bit more careful because they want to make sure, you know, is there going to be a second spike and are they going to have to then look for a refund again? I think they're just being a bit more careful around it, to be honest. So I think there's lots of activity, lots of people interested in traveling, but they actually, want to see the outcome of this before they part with their money, I think.
Absolutely. And Farina, the issue of the quarantine and the air bridges that's being talked about a lot in the press at the moment, is this one of the key issues that you're seeing with your clients at the moment? Oh, Farina, I think you might be on mute.
Sorry.
Thanks.
That's right. Hello, everyone. It is, yeah. So one of the main issues, obviously, at the moment is the quarantine. Obviously, the main question that's coming out of it is, do we have to cancel the holiday then if there is a booked holiday due to the 14-day quarantine in the UK? As Matt mentioned, obviously it isn't going to have much of an impact at the moment because the FCO advisory against travel is still in place, and as long as that stays in place, you have to cancel the holidays, you have to offer the full refund. Once that's lifted, and provided that there are no restrictions in destination relating to quarantine, the situation does change somewhat, because if you sort of look at the wording of the PTRs, if you look at the right to cancel that customers have under regulation 12.7, which is where a customer can cancel their holiday due to unavoidable and extraordinary circumstances at the destination, and which affects performance of the package. So if you look at that in light of the quarantine arrangements, well, the quarantine is not in destination, it's in the UK, and it doesn't affect performance of the package. The package holiday can still go ahead. It's only when they return to the UK that they're subject to the 14-day quarantine. So actually, the right to cancel under Reg 12.7 doesn't apply in this situation, and neither do the sort of the rights or the obligations under regulations 11 and 12, which are where the tour operator has to cancel because they can't provide the package due to unavoidable and extraordinary circumstances, or where they have to make a significant change and offer the right to refund. Because again, that is all linked to performance of the package, and if the package can be performed as contracted, then there isn't you know, the regulation 11 and 12 doesn't apply, so you don't have to cancel and offer a full refund. So obviously this is very dependent on the performance of the package not being affected, so there can't be any quarantine restrictions in destination there, and also looking at what kind of social distancing and other measures might be in place at destination due to public health measures. But provided that that's relatively minimal and the package can still go ahead as contracted, then there isn't an obligation to cancel and offer a full refund. I have spoken to ABTRA about this as well, just to make sure that I'm not going off on a limb in advising on that, and they did agree. They agreed with my stance as well. They did advise me that they're in discussions with the Competition and Markets Authority about this particular point. Because you'll know that obviously the CMA issued some guidance a couple of weeks ago around the fact that they would expect refunds to be given where a customer can't receive services or they have to cancel services because they can't, because of public health measures. But again, that only relates to where services can't be provided or services can't be received. So in this particular scenario, the services can be provided and the customer can still go on holiday and receive the services. It's all related to when they actually return to the UK. You know, ABTRA told me that they are talking to the CMA about it. They're advising the CMA that that's their stance as well, in terms of they don't think that there's a right to cancel. You know, it'll be interesting to see what the CMA comes out to say and whether they have a different view to our view. You know, if they do, then that's, you know, going to be what we'd be looking at complying with. But as it stands, you know, the 14-day quarantine doesn't give the right to cancel and offer a full refund.
Thanks, Farina. That's really helpful. I mean, obviously the quarantine is impacting new bookings being made, but that's definitely reassuring to know that it provides a little bit of respite in terms of existing bookings. So it's really the FCO advice that is the key thing that we're waiting for at the moment, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know whether actually they will lift the FCO advice at the same time, and that's why they're bringing in the 14-day quarantine, because they're going to lift the FCO advice. I don't know. I'm majorly speculating there, but maybe that's, you know, why they're doing it in this way and on that date. It remains to be seen. But until the FCO advice is lifted, actually the 14-day quarantine is going to have very limited impact on the travel industry. And it's worth mentioning that companies can be more generous if they want. So if you do have customers that can't work from home, for example, so would have to take a further 14 days annual leave off just to be able to go on holiday, you might want to have a slightly gentler approach and be a bit more generous and maybe allow them to postpone their holiday instead of having to cancel. But you're not, as it stands, you're not under a legal obligation to do so. And I guess and I guess the other point as well, sorry, is travel insurance, whether they have travel insurance. You know, if it is an existing booking that they have, they may well have travel insurance that still covers them. But for pandemics and for COVID-19, and they may well manage to recover their cancellation fees on that basis if they can make an insurance claim. They also have the right to transfer the contract under the PTR, so they can always try and transfer it to another person, Otherwise, you know, they'd be looking at cancelling and just paying whatever the standard cancellation charges are. I think the other thing that I am seeing, and something to be wary of, is people asking for justification of the cancellation charges now. So if they are finding themselves in a position where they want to cancel a holiday, and you know, the tour operator can legally impose their own standard cancellation charges, I am seeing more and more clients get in touch saying, you know, actually the customer is asking us to justify our cancellation charges, and do we have to do that? And the answer is yes, you do have to do that under the PTRs. There is a requirement in the PTRs that if a customer asks you to justify your cancellation charges, you have to provide that justification. So that's something to just be aware of. And if you do think that your cancellation charges are perhaps a bit more stringent or a bit higher than they should be in that situation, you may want to look at you know, maybe reducing them so that they reflect, you know, a genuine pre-estimate of the loss that you would incur by that customer cancelling their holiday.
So, for example, if you've had to pay suppliers out, or you've had to, you know, do a lot of administration on a booking, you can justify that cancellation. But if you haven't paid any suppliers, potentially you could be asking for too much.
Yes, agreed. And you know, most tour operators will have a standardised table of cancellation charges, which is fine. That's been endorsed by the PTRs. So you can, you know, it doesn't necessarily have to be in relation to that specific booking. You can say, look, across the board, this is how we have calculated our cancellation charges, and this is what they apply to. But if, and within those cancellation charges, you would normally have something to reflect the likelihood of you reselling that holiday, and the chances of reselling a holiday is pretty low at the moment. So that again is something in favour in terms of the cancellation charges. What you shouldn't be doing with the cancellation charges is making a profit. They're not there as a way of making profit. They should just be there to cover your losses in the event that that customer cancelled at that period in time.
Okay, thank you. We've had a question with regards to clients who are over 70, so they're in the vulnerable age group, and who've been getting in touch with kind of cancellation requests for trips. You know, they're not going till September, but obviously there's been so much emphasis on if you're over 70, you know, maybe you want to be more careful. Are you able to answer in what circumstances their insurance would be liable for their loss? So, for example, if the flights are running but the FCO advice is the same, who would be expected to refund? Is it the travel firm or the insurance company?
If the FCO advice remains against travel, then it would be the travel firm that would be responsible for a refund in that situation, because there's an FCO advisory against travel. If the FCO advisory against travel has lifted in September, but understandably these customers are over 70, so they don't want to travel, in that situation, I would say the travel insurance should be responsible and should refund them. But what I will flag is that the European Commission put some guidance out a while ago, actually, and I think I mentioned it on the last call, and they did say that where customers are high risk, and they're travelling to a destination where potentially there is a high risk of catching the virus, then it's reasonable for them to want to cancel under Regulation 12.7 and receive a full refund. However, that guidance does say that you can push a customer to their travel insurance as well. So my advice in that situation would be it should sit with the travel insurer. But you know, if the travel insurer pushes it back, then you're in slightly grey territory there because of that particular guidance. But yeah, but it, you know, if the FCO advisory is in place as per that question, then it will sit with the tour operator. And if you ask them to push it to the travel insurer, which you are entitled to do so, you should just be prepared that the insurer will probably push it back.
And are you giving any advice to your clients in terms of how kind of long the ping pong should go on for between the operator and the travel insurer? I mean, it's such a difficult situation, isn't there, in terms of it's such a grey area that how you know, how long can you delay giving the refund if the travel insurer refuses to pay out?
In a situation where we think the insurer should be paying out.
Yeah, or it's the grey area that you've just talked about, which is the vulnerable customer potentially.
It's ultimately it will come down to the facts of that particular situation. So it will be age of the customer, do they have any pre-existing medical conditions, where are they travelling to, What is the infection rate looking like in that particular country? Also very much around performance of the package itself. So you have to be confident that you can perform that package travel as contracted. And then I think what you would basically do is you would go off the wording of the PTRs and say, well, actually, we don't think 12.7 does apply here, and also we don't think we have to offer a refund because performance of the package is not affected. And I think that's the key point. You would really sort of stress that. And I think you've got a relatively strong argument there. But if the and I think you could keep pushing back on that basis in the hope that ultimately the travel insurer will pay out. I think, if the travel insurer asks you to put that in writing, so be it, if that's what they would use to pay out. But I don't really have an answer as to how often you should go back and forth. I think your position is relatively strong, so I think you should keep pushing back. It's not, because it isn't straightforward, I think you have enough of an argument there to be able to keep pushing back on that basis and seeing what the insurer says. And then ultimately, if you're in a situation where, at the end of the day, the insurer is saying no, you might want to consider refunding on the basis of that particular European Commission guidance. But it could go either way, because the European Commission guidance also says it can be pushed back to the travel insurer. So really, it is a tricky situation there. And I think a lot gets pushed back onto tour operators. So I think if you are in a grey area, I would really keep pushing with the travel insurer, because I think they're in a position where they're able to push a lot of these claims back onto tour operators because of PTRs. So I would say anywhere where there's a slightly grey area, I would just keep pushing.
Thanks, Farina. That's really helpful and just provides, that a little bit reassurance to those that are doing that's kind of like, the right thing to do, or that, it's what the industry is doing at the moment. So thank you for that. Just turn to Adam now. Adam, I know, having spoken to you earlier this week, you've mentioned that there's potentially new funding available from local councils. Do you have any more information on that?
Yes, I do, Chris. Good morning, everybody. It's really only a particularly brief one from me today, but just to raise awareness, really. So initially, when all this kicked off, we saw travel businesses looking at the Small Business Grant Fund or the Retail, Hospitality and Leisure Grant Fund. Now, quite a number of our clients seem to fall short, particularly where you're working in flexible offices and you're not necessarily assessed for business rates, and that was the mechanism that was being used to distribute those grants. At the turn of this month, we've seen the release of extra funding to local authorities to distribute under what is called the Discretionary Grant Fund. So it's really just to raise awareness. If you haven't seen it already, there are grants available for 25,000, 10,000, or anything up to 10,000. But it's not fixed as the other two grant funds were. There is an application to fill out with your local authority, and they will decide on what kind of grant level you get. And just very briefly, the eligibility broadly is based in the UK. You need to be a small company, so that they're based on the usual company house limits. You need to have fixed building costs such as rent or trading at the 11th of March, and also be adversely impacted by the coronavirus. I'll send around the link on the chat, actually, if that's okay, Chris, just pointing people in direction so they can read that in full. But what we are seeing is some councils have got an application process that's already live and has a deadline. So I'd urge people, if you haven't looked at it already, just to look at your local authority's website. Usually quite clear. It comes on. There is another discretionary fund that existed previously, but if you Google or look at discretionary grant fund, it should come up. Some of those applications, I know there are local authorities in Kent that they're closing this week, but equally I've looked at some of the London local authorities, and they're not quite there yet with their application online. So definitely worth checking. I'll send that link around now. But
thanks, Adam.
It for me. Well, the only other thing to note is if you already have the Small Business Grant Fund or the Retail, Hospitality and Leisure Grant Fund, you can't then apply for this one, but you can still obviously use the furlough scheme and any of the other help. So you just can't get more than one fund effectively.
Okay, thank you for that, and we will make sure that that link is sent around in our regular mail shot as well for anyone who hasn't got the chat function there.
Yeah,
Thanks,
I'll put it in
Adam.
the chat, but yeah, happy to forward that around as well.
Brilliant, thank you.
No.
So one of the things, one of the latest updates this in the last week has been new developments in the furlough scheme that we've been waiting for a few weeks actually. So we've asked for some guest speakers to run through this for us today. So Kathryn Dooks and Butler from Kemp Little both specialise in employment law, and they're going to take us through some slides on the furlough scheme. Thank you both for joining us.
Thanks very much for having us.
And so if you have any questions at all throughout the presentation, please use the Q&A function or email me, and I will ask Kathryn and Rebecca at the end of their presentation.
Great, thanks. I will just share my screen. Just bear with me while I get that going. Okay, just bear with me a second. So hopefully you can see that, everybody. Is that showing correctly?
We can. Thank you, Kathryn.
Great, fantastic. Thanks very much. So yes, we just thought it would be worth giving a little bit of a short presentation on the changes to the coronavirus job retention scheme, also known as the furlough scheme. And just thought it would be useful very briefly to start with what the scheme is like now. And I'm sure many of you will be well aware of this because you'll be using this already for most of your staff. Basically, the current coronavirus job retention scheme was a scheme that ran, well, it started from around the 19th of March, but it was backdated to the 1st of March, and it runs till the 30th of July. And under the scheme, you can furlough your employees, so you can put them out on paid leave, and then you can claim up to 80% of their salary or their normal wages, which is capped at £2,500 per month. You can also claim employers' national insurance contributions and employers' minimum auto-enrolment pension contributions from HMRC. During the period of furlough, the employees can't undertake work for you, which would generate revenue for you, but they can undertake training and they can undertake voluntary work. And you can furlough staff for a minimum of 3 weeks at a time, which means that you can take staff on and off furlough as long as they do a minimum of 3 weeks. So you can rotate staff if you want to do so. There are some trickier pointers with the scheme, and I've just highlighted a few of those on the next slide. So what happens with holiday pay? Well, employees will continue to accrue holiday whilst they're on furlough, but if you are asking staff to take holiday whilst they're on furlough, or for example, if there's a bank holiday whilst they're on furlough and they would normally be entitled to bank holidays off, then they're entitled to be paid full pay for those periods, not the 80% pay that you recover from the government. So there'd be an additional 20% top up there. In addition, things like maternity pay and shared parental pay and those sorts of things, you can continue to be on maternity leave and be furloughed, and then you can claim through the scheme for enhanced contractual pay for maternity and those sorts of things. And you can furlough employees who are shielding or employees who are caring for children. So originally when the scheme was introduced, people thought that the scheme was literally just a way of avoiding redundancies, and that you couldn't use the scheme unless you absolutely had to make redundancies. It's become a little bit clearer that that's loosened up a bit. So it's clear that if your employees need to shield, for example, or if they're caring for their children and they can't work, then you can furlough them under the scheme under those circumstances. You do need employees' agreement to furlough, but there's no sort of formal consultation period required to do that. And I'm now going to hand over to my colleague Rebecca, who's going to talk to you a little bit about the changes that have been announced recently and that are being introduced from the end of the month.
Thanks, Kathryn. Hi, everyone. So yes, the scheme has been extended until the 31st of October 2020, but it's going to have some flexibility as of the 1st of July 2020. And what that flexibility is that employers are going to be able to bring back employees previously on furlough back to work on a part-time basis. Now, when working, the scheme fact sheet that's been released says that employees should be paid their normal wage whilst they will receive the furlough grant for the remainder of their usual working hours. Now, currently there's no maximum or minimum number of hours that employees can work while they're on flexible furlough, or not any mention of that in the detail that's currently been released. I should say that at the moment all that we have is a fact sheet on it, and we are waiting for further details of what the flexible furlough scheme will look like from the 12th of June. But based on what we know at the moment, it appears that you can agree any working arrangement with an employee on flexible furlough, and that this could change from week to week, which is quite a big change from the current position which Kathryn's just outlined, which is that furlough has to last for 3 weeks. So when claiming the grant for furloughed hours, you would be able to report and claim for a period of just 1 week at a time. So it's kind of watch and wait at the moment as to the specific details of the scheme, but it should offer employers a lot more options when bringing employees back to work. So in terms of what you can claim for employees on the flexible furlough scheme arrangements, you'll be able to claim the grant for the hours that the employees are not working, calculated by reference to their usual hours worked in any claim period. And remember, that can be 1 week. The grant of the £2.5 grand and the cap will be reduced in proportion to the hours worked. So you're going to need to report the hours worked and the usual hours that an employee would be expected to work in a claim period. So in practice, what this means is that you're going to have to need a system in place to track hours of worked and not worked, which of course, if workers are hourly paid anyway, then that might be fine because you'll already have that system in place. But for salaried employees that you've got on furlough, whose hours you may not have been tracking in that way, you're going to have to implement a sensible system to track those hours, which of course doesn't make the process of making a claim unnecessarily difficult. So obviously still waiting for further details of the process and what this claiming process may look like for the flexible furlough scheme, but you could start to have a think about how you might implement that kind of system now, of course. Do you need a new furlough agreement for placing an employee on flexible furlough? Well, the answer is yes, you will. To be eligible for the grant, you have to agree with your employee any new flexible furloughing arrangements and confirm that agreement in writing. So that's quite clear from the fact sheet that has been published, so make sure you do that. Now turning to, and of course the fact sheet that I've just referenced, I have put on the slide for you as well so that you can refer to that afterwards. Moving to the next slide, Kathryn, if you will. Thanks. So from the 1st of August, there's going to be a reduction in the grant available, and I've put all the detail for you there, but I'll talk through it as well. So from August, you'll be required to make a gradually increasing contribution towards salaries. Employees will continue to receive the 80% of their wages, but there'll be a staggered increase in what employers are required to contribute. So in August, the government contribution will remain 80%, but you will be required to contribute employer national insurance contributions and pension contributions. In September, that will increase, so you'll have to contribute 10% of wages, and the government will decrease their contribution to 70% of wages. And from October, your employer contribution will increase to 20%, and the government will decrease their contribution to 60%. And then the scheme will close at the end of October. So all of that is designed to get us back to work. There are some key dates for the new extension to the scheme. One is that it will be closed to new entrants from the 30th of June. But what that does is have a knock-on impact on on what you need to be doing now, really, which is that only employees who have spent 3 weeks on furlough before the 30th of June can continue to be furloughed or work under the new flexible furlough scheme. So the last date for employees to be furloughed, and I put it in bold there because it's very important if you are intending on doing that, is the 10th of June. So that's your last date to furlough employees for the first time, so that they can have that minimum 3-week period as required under the current furlough scheme provisions. And then we have this provision that from the 1st of July, the number of employees you can claim for in any claim period cannot exceed the maximum number that you've claimed for under any previous claim. So you might be thinking, well, how will that work? Well, practically, what that means is that you will have to work out the maximum number of employees that you'll want to make a furlough claim for from the 1st of July onwards, and ensure that that number has been furloughed in one previous claim period. So if you haven't already furloughed people, but you think you might need to in future under the flexible furlough arrangements, then you've still got time to address that, provided that you take action by the 10th of June by furloughing the maximum number of employees you will want to furlough from the 1st of July onwards. So that's the key provisions from the scheme. As I say, watch this wait. We'll be eagerly awaiting the details of the scheme, which will be released on the 12th of June. So, and over to you, Kathryn.
Thanks. So I thought it might be worth just touching very briefly on your options for what happens next. So it may be that you're looking at the flexible furlough scheme and or the reduction on the amounts that the government is contributing to furlough, and thinking, well, actually, I can probably live without the furlough scheme now, and I'm considering returning to the workplace some of my furloughed staff. And if you're doing that, so you're either ending furlough or you're using the flexible furlough scheme to bring staff back part-time, then you do need to bear in mind the government guidance on secure workplaces, and making sure you put in place health and safety precautions to ensure that people can work safely in light of the government guidance. So the first thing to do would be to undertake a health and safety risk assessment of the workplace in light of the government guidance, and depending on the exact nature of the workplace, if it's say an office, if it's a travel agency and it's an office, there's quite clear guidance for kind of office-based workspaces, so it's worth reading through that guidance. It's got some useful hints and tips for employers on specific actions they can take. Bear in mind social distancing, but also thinking about which of your employees fall within a vulnerable group. Are they people who live with employees who are shielding, or are they themselves vulnerable and may not be able to return to the workplace at the moment? And if so, how do you handle that? Can they continue to work from home? And also bear in mind employees with childcare issues. We've seen some employees and their children have gone back to school this week, but it's certainly not every child in the UK has gone back to school. It's only certain age groups. Some nurseries are open, but not all nurseries. So it may well be you have to deal with employees on a case-by-case basis in terms of whether they can return to work because they've got childcare or not. So it's worth thinking about all of those factors. On the other hand, if you can't afford the increased employer contribution that's coming into place from August onwards. So in August, it'll be a sort of around about a 5% contribution because it's your employer's national insurance contributions and your pension. But after that, it ramps up to 10 and 20. If you can't afford that contribution, then you're probably having to face redundancies. And so if you're thinking about that, then you need to think quite carefully about the timescale involved and the numbers involved. So the numbers dictate the timescale. If you're making 20 or more employees redundant at one establishment in a 90-day period, then there's a 30-day consultation process. And if it's 100 or more employees, then it's a 45-day consultation process. If you've got less than 20, then you can just do an individual consultation process, which doesn't have a fixed timescale, but would typically take between a week or two on average. And if you're thinking about having to contemplate redundancies, then bear in mind you need a fair reason for dismissal. So there needs to be a genuine redundancy, as in a diminished requirement for that particular role, or a closure of the workplace altogether. You need to follow a fair process, otherwise you're risking an unfair dismissal claim from employees with more than 2 years service. And a fair process would involve either the collective consultation that we've described and or individual consultation, depending on numbers. And then you can think about things like whether you want to, if you don't need to close the entire workplace and it's just a question of reducing your workforce, whether you want to ask for volunteers for redundancy rather than making compulsory redundancies. I guess the pros and cons of that are, the cons of that are you may not have any control over who volunteers, and you may lose your best and most experienced staff through volunteering. So although that said, you know, the pros of it are that it's more positive in terms of productivity and employee engagement. You also need to think about a fair selection process. So if you're not making everyone redundant, but you're having to reduce numbers in each team, then you need to follow an objective selection process as far as possible and avoid discriminatory criteria. And then you need to think about the redundancy package and whether, for example, employees continue on furlough whilst you make them redundant and work out their notice period on furlough, so you're at least getting benefit of government support during that time. So those are the main factors. I think we're going to move now to some questions and answers, a Q&A session, if people would like to do that.
That's great. Thank you, Kathryn, and thank you, Rebecca. Yeah, we do have some questions. So just a couple of clarification points. First of all, when you say, or when the government say no new entrants to the scheme after June the 10th, or that's when they have to be furloughed at least, do they mean someone who has not been furloughed at some point previously?
Rebecca, do you want to pick that one up?
Yes, so I think I've seen a question on the chat saying about employees that have previously been furloughed but have come back to work, and if they have the option to go on part-time furlough from the 1st of July. And I think the answer is that yes, as long as they've been furloughed for that full 3-week period at some point prior to the 30th of June, then they can. But I would say that the wording on the fact sheet is slightly unclear, because it does say that from the 1st of July, employees can bring back to work employees that have previously been furloughed and claim under the flexible furlough arrangement. So the expression, it sort of implies in one sense that employees must be on full furlough immediately before they can be moved to a new flexible arrangement. But that would seem that, you know, if that's the intended meaning, it would appear quite odd. So I think the position should be that an employee can be put on flexible furlough from the 1st of July as long as they've spent that full 3-week period on furlough at some point prior to the 30th of June, even if they are back at work before being moved to flexible furloughing. And I've seen that an HMRC customer support advisor has confirmed that that interpretation is correct, although of course that isn't a legally binding view from an HMRC customer advisor, but we're finding that's often the case because these things are never perfect, you know, with the rushing out and with the time constraints and so on and so forth. We've seen this before with the guidance issued by HMRC and the Treasury direction, of course, and all the previous conflict between those. So in some ways it isn't a surprise that there's this sort of slightly odd, you know, point here, but I think it has to be the case that they can be brought back to work and put on flexible furlough.
Quite a lot of the policy has been set via Twitter or clarified via Twitter. So it's kind of frustrating in that respect.
And I suppose it's quite frustrating as well, I guess, if the full guidance is coming out on the 12th of June, and yet there's that date of the 10th of June where potentially you've got to start someone on furlough. Okay.
Yes, I think it's really unhelpful. I mean, I will just add though as well, remember that remember the maximum number point that I mentioned. That's really important. So you can't claim for more employees than that maximum number. So if you have, say for example, you've been rotating 20 employees on furlough, but you've only ever claimed for 10 employees at a time while the other 10 are at work, you couldn't put all 20 employees onto part-time furlough from the 1st of July, because that would exceed the maximum number that you've claimed for under your previous claims. So if you want to be able to make claims for 20 employees from the 1st of July, then you'll need to make sure that you claim for all 20 employees in June, if that makes sense.
Wow. So you'd have to furlough all 20 from the 10th of June.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yep, that makes sense. And just a couple of other questions. I mean, the travel industry has been particularly impacted in terms of what amount they should calculate for the furlough, because a lot of staff are paid commission payments. One of the questions I have is if an employer claims for commission payments based on what they earned last year, and then they bring the employees back part-time in July when they need to pay a proportion of the commission payments, would they have to pay that? Because obviously they won't be getting any income to cover this potentially if they're not getting any bookings. So would how they've claimed before dictate how they have to pay after the scheme, if that makes sense, in the different time periods?
Rebecca, is there any guidance, Rebecca, on how you're calculating the wages under the flexible furlough scheme at this stage, or is it something we're going to need to wait till the 12th of June, July?
I think certainly for the flexible scheme, it's it's something that I don't think the details have been released yet from the fact sheet that I've seen. So that will be a watch and wait.
Okay.
I would imagine that you'd think that, logically speaking, although that may not be correct, but you'd think that logically speaking they'd use the same test, if you like, as they do now, which is that any non-discretionary commission, in terms of the hours when people are furloughed and not working, you only include commission which is not discretionary. So in other words, compulsory commission, commission that's a contractual entitlement. And then for the hours that they're working, if they're generating commission, you'd pay it in accordance with your normal scheme for the hours worked. But we need greater clarification on that, I think, at this stage.
But in terms of, obviously, if someone wants to be careful how they're claiming on the furlough scheme at the moment, can they have until the 30th of June? Is that right, to do that?
Yes.
Yes.
So at least they will have that time, to digest the guidance on the 12th of June. Hopefully that provides something more clarity then.
Mm-hmm.
And you talked about redundancy. If you make someone redundant and you have to pay them for the 1 month notice, can this be reclaimed under the furlough scheme?
Our understanding is that yes, you can. If the employee works out their notice period, you can still claim under the furlough scheme, but that, and there are some slightly complicated rules about this, but generally speaking, you would need to top up their pay to 100% of pay. So you couldn't benefit from only having to pay them 80% of their pay for their notice period. There are some complex rules on it because it depends exactly how long the notice period is versus statutory notice entitlement, which is probably a bit of a technical legal point that's a bit too technical to go into now. But if anyone needs any further guidance on that, we're happy to provide it.
Okay, thank you. And obviously at the minute there's that 80% of salary which can be claimed, and you talked about how the employers are going to have to increase their contribution in August and onwards. That is mandatory, I take it. They can't choose to just reduce the employee's salary and pay them the 70% or the amount that you talked about earlier.
Rebecca, do you want to pick that one up?
Yeah, they can by agreement. They can agree a reduction in salary, but it just means that the maximum that they'll be able to claim from the government is set at those limits.
Right. Okay.
So and every agreement obviously has to be recorded in writing.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, thank you. Well, the only other question we've had is if it's possible to give a copy of our slides to our members, if that would be okay.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
brilliant.
absolutely.
Thank you. Well, thank you both so much for covering that subject. I appreciate that obviously the guidance has not provided as much clarity as we'd all wanted, but hopefully on the 12th of June we'll get a little bit more, but that's given people food for thought in the meantime. Just one quick question that someone has sent through actually. So if commissions are normally triggered by the holiday returning, can you claim as the holidays haven't been completed? That's quite a technical question, I assume.
I guess what they're asking is, and perhaps it's a way of clarifying the question, if someone hasn't taken holiday while they've been furloughed, do you have to pay them the commission that you would normally pay in respect of holiday pay?
Yes.
So the answer is no. It would you'd pay them commission on holiday pay when they actually took the annual leave, unless you were doing some sort of rolled up holiday pay calculation, which is a bit legally dubious anyway. So I hope that's helpful. I hope that answers the question.
Okay, well, I have had a no back for the person who asked that question, but I mean, maybe if that person wants to email me, we could go into more detail offline. Yeah,
Probably
okay.
more detail on, yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. Well, thank you very much for everyone's contributions today. It's been really helpful. Thank you all to the attendees as well. We will be holding these webinars every couple of weeks, unless anything urgent crops up in the meantime. And if there are any subjects that you would like us to cover that's affecting your business at the moment, then please get in touch and let us know. But in the meantime, if you have any queries, get in touch with us and we can help. We will try and help as much as possible. But thank you everyone, and goodbye.